Hey friends, welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Danita Cummins, and oh my gosh, welcome to November. It is the month of our first year anniversary being the host of the Entrusted to Lead podcast, which is crazy that we've made it this far. And so I'm inviting you this month to listen to a candid conversation with my good friend and my personal mentor, Mike Kontio. So this month we're going to do two sessions, part 1 and part 2, where he and I talk about so many things. There's not even a way for me to build a beginning pitch because we talk about so much. But my hope in this first segment is that you get a chance to hear behind the scenes what it's like in the day, in the life of me, being surrounded by amazing people who challenge and pour into me. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Mike. It's filled with lots of nuggets about life and faith and pain and suffering. And we get into the questions about what is the point and how to lead our families well, and so many things. So in the segment 1, we jump right into the conversation, and I hope that you enjoy our chat today. I hope that it brings you some peace and a renewed perspective on yourself, on the world, and on the point of suffering and what this crazy thing called life is all about, which is mostly what Mike and I talk about every time we get on the phone. So this conversation is a long time coming, and I hope it brings you joy and challenges you to see a new perspective. So grab your cup of coffee or your favorite beverage of choice, and let's get started. Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Cult Creatives. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas, and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Cult Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Cult Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast, and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow. Thanks, Mike, for coming on the show. This is our Entrusted to Lead podcast, and I am joined today by my friend, and I get to say mentor and colleague and all the things. I'm not really sure how to identify our relationship that we've had, I think, for almost a decade now, if I go back and try to figure out the times that we've spent life together. But this is Mike Kontio. He is, like I said, a friend and a mentor, and we worked alongside each other in the military for years, shared same space in the faith community. And so I am super glad to have you come on the show and chat today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you asking. Can you share the honor you bestowed upon me as mentor and explain, how that materialized for you?
I think for me, if I look back over our journey, our, time we've spent together, I watched you lead through when we were at JSOC. I watched you, in your role as a facilitator when you were working and helping the command navigate hard conversations. I remember just like sexual assault and prevention and those programs and different things that you did. So I got to see you work in an active role in leading and facilitating. And so that I found to be it was very encouraging to me, if I'm being super candid. Having gone through my life in the military, this is not what I thought this conversation was going to be about at all. But sexual assault and sexual harassment is a big thing, especially even in the military culture. And having been kind of a person who experienced different versions of that in my life, I think that was my first time of watching you facilitate hard conversations and watching you do that. So I respected you, the way you approached that conversation, the way you led groups of people to talk through that. So that was the first piece, I think, if I go back and remember why I think I really respected you as a person and a leader. And then over just the years of working, like again, going to church together, not really being in ministry together. We didn't serve in ministry together, but we shared the same space with your family and my family and those things. So I just kind of watched you as a father and as a husband, in the way you interacted outside the office. And you were very true. Your personality, your character, the way you talked to me in the church settings, same way you talked to somebody on the compound. So in that respect, I just got to the place where I really trusted you in what I thought your character was. And then over the years, me moving on and calling you, as a friend saying, hey, I think I want to start this business. What do you think? I just value very much your opinion, but it's rooted in what I believe your character is. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. So I think it's important to point out too, when we talk about, those conversations at the time when I agreed to take that role and that position inside the organization, the context is, we worked inside special operations community. And even when I took the role, this is some of my ignorance, that I didn't know that was even a program in the military. And when I accepted the job, I really questioned, like, what am I doing? In self-evaluation, I've either enabled, contributed, or allowed the behavior, regardless of whether I did it knowingly or unknowingly. It was a kind of a fork in the road for me that I can either approach this job with the commitment and dedication that is expected at any role in that organization where excellence, is kind of sought after. And, and I just decided to own it. And that was, once I did that, it just opened my eyes to the journey that we are, you can call it man's search for meaning or whatever you want to call it, but it was really my gateway to self-awareness and the emotional intelligence piece. Yeah, I just want to point out, it wasn't necessarily a topic or conversation that people wanted to have. It was mandated to have. And the approach was, let's not talk about procedures, policy. Let's talk about the conversations around and root issues. Because I believe that what you had discussed, sexual harassment, sexual assault, was a symptom of something else. And that was rooted in relationships or lack of relationships and authenticity. So yeah, I just wanted to point out, that was not a subject that people raised their hand to volunteer for. It was mandated. And I knew that people were going to be there and have to sit in that space. And it was important to make sure that I valued their time and brought something of value to them. Interestingly enough, there was one session, it might have been the last session I had with your team. And I'll never forget it because it just points to perspective and the filters through which we look through.
Right.
And that conditioning and those beliefs that influence whether it's perceived or real. And a lot of times it's not real, it's perceived. So in your journey, we had a couple conversations and we had the opportunity to connect. How did that help or influence you in your pathway?
I think equally when you said you entered, that was the beginning of your self-awareness journey, kind of opening those lenses to yourself, and which is a never-ending lifelong journey. Right. Yeah. And I think if we ever think we get there, it's kind of like anything else, leadership, faith. You think you get there, then there's an arrogance, I think, with that statement. That was true for me too. I was in that season of like my self-awareness, and I say healing. I think we've talked about that way. My healing journey in terms of looking at like past abuse, things that had happened in my life, just a lot of things that I carried. And so that was going on underneath the surface of my just life, trying to be a mom and a person of faith and serving in ministry and, leading my family through 6 deployments as my husband is gone for, 10 years. So I think that part I probably attached to more so just because I was in that season of life. And so I was unwrapping a lot of those things that had happened to me, my experiences, and trying to let God's light shine in them and to find light in dark places. And that's kind of was that season. If I could go back and bookend it, it was a season of trying to find light in the darkness, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all those things. So I was having all of those things go on. And then, just our seasons of conversation about self-awareness, about that journey, and you being, I think, over the years, transparent about that has really been very helpful to me because it's not a conversation that a lot of people have. And if I'm being honest, it's not a conversation that a lot of men are willing to kind of have and say, hey, I'm having, opening up these places and trying to be more introspective. We do it, but I think your ability to be transparent about that and your journey and the things that you saw was very helpful to me. So I think those were the two things that I really found, to be very valuable.
And I sensed, there was this like 1 foot out of the door and 1 foot in the door in some areas. And I think where you're at right now is like, I feel like I need to step out. There's other things I need to do. I'm called to do or desire to do, or both. And it's that hesitation to just go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true. I could say that. And I work with a lot of different people, business and ministry. And I see that a lot. Like people have this passion or heart or dream, that they want or feel called to do something else. We can say to calling or dream or purpose or whatever. But then there are all of those layers of insecurity, like you're saying, and self-doubt and on our own biases and perceptions that keep us from like leaning forward. I think there's wisdom. I have this conversation a lot with my kids. Like, God does call us to be wise, right? I mean, we do have mental agility. We do have all of these things. We should use them, right? The resources that we have been given. So you don't want to step out and be unwise or reckless or foolish. But then there comes a degree of faith where you just need to lean in, and it's okay that it's messy, and it's okay that it's not going to be perfect and shiny in a box. And I feel like for people in the military, that's hard to do sometimes, because when you're in the military for so long, your identity is so wrapped up in that thing, right? You're a warrior. I think you and I have talked about that before. Like, what does a warrior mean, right? Well, how do you define a warrior? And so I think we get our mindset wrapped around this identity of who we are, and then thinking that we could be something else or serve somewhere else or do something else is really hard to break that mindset. So, but I think that's pretty common, at least from what I see.
I want to know, when did you start this podcast?
November.
Well,
I officially launched in November. Yeah.
Okay.
November.
Yeah. And look, I went and listened to quite a few of them.
Did you? Oh, thanks.
Yep. Well done.
Thank you.
Good job. I would say, I listened to the ones that you had, I think your first two, they were just you though.
Yeah. The first, think 3. Yeah. The first 3 are just me. Yeah.
Have you listened to them yourself?
I have, with my family, which is like my support group,
How was that?
It was good because, I love my kids. I think we were talking right before I hit record. My kids are 23, 22, 18, and 16. And 2 of them are married and have kids, and then 2 are still at home. I love them. That's kind of like ridiculous to say I love my kids. I love their minds, and I really value their feedback and their, opinions, as well as my husband. I do. I value all of their opinions, and they help me be a better version of myself when I get in that mindset of like, I'm afraid to do ABCD. So I like them to like give me feedback, and they're pretty candid. Like they'll tell me like, that sounds like you are super nervous and, whatever. So I value their opinion.
Was it cringy at first?
It is still cringy. Yes, It is cringy. I think audio is better than video. Like video scares me. The thought of creating TikToks or videos, I don't know why. I'm like, oh, that's really hard. I'm getting better with podcasting because, kind of in the dark in the room by yourself with your friends. So it's not as, I don't know, it doesn't seem as vulnerable to me.
Episode 1 is not going to be what episode 100 looks like. And you can't figure out what 100 looks like until you do 1.
Yeah. Right.
And if we knew the answer, we wouldn't have to have a plan. So it was, okay, step out in obedience if this is something that you think you need to do, and do it.
Right.
You may not have the podcast enduring, but it may be something that propels you into an awareness or understanding of what you need to do next. So when I heard your podcast, I was like, wow, okay, I can see where this is relevant and important to a demographic, and it needs to be said and it needs to be heard. It may not be mainstream. It may be mainstream. Who knows?
Right.
But I could immediately, I said, yes, this is a voice. This is something that will resonate with the demographic, if not multiple demographics. And so kudos to you for, just sticking with it. I think the average is people stop after six
Maybe.
or seven, somewhere in there,
Yeah.
And so if you make it to past seven,
Yeah.
you're in the, what is it? The 90 percentile already.
Right. That's exactly right.
So
yeah, that's so true. I feel like that. I was just doing that today. I was getting coffee and I was like, don't use real sugar. You're supposed to use this other sugar, remember? And I was like, man, consistency is a hard thing. But I think across all of us, consistency, like you're saying, that's one of the hardest things. It's not the plan. It's not the vision. It's not the strategy. It's like the just get up every day and do the 3 things that you need to do, to move the ball down the field. And I have gotten to this place. I'm sure it has to do a lot with, I say, ministry and the nonprofit and just having to learn to be comfortable in unknown spaces. And people say that like, well, how did you do that? And I'm like, through a lot of mentorship, I say, because it wasn't me just in my own mind, but that realization that what do you have in your hand today? Well, I have these 3 things in my hand because I'm a great planner. Like I can give you a massive Excel spreadsheet with a 5-year roadmap and a FIDEP plan and all the things, right? But I need to be able to do the thing that I have right now today. And I've gotten to this place in my life where I realize like everything that the Lord needs me to have today, I have. The lilies of the field and the sparrows. Like, don't worry about tomorrow, what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. Like you have everything you need today. And in that place, there's faith, like you said, and obedience. And that's a muscle that we grow. Like if it doesn't just happen, you have to grow it. But then there's also that learning, like you said, and it might not be about the end result of the podcast being successful or 1 million views or downloads or whatever. It might just be like in this season, you need to just do these 3 things and show up, learn how to show up every day for yourself, show up for, people that matter to you, show up for your friends, right? And make a space to have a conversation with people that you care about. Like, I don't know, like you're saying, we get so demographic, like you said, numbers and all the things, businesses, value proposition, all that. But sometimes it's just like, you just need, some soul love. So just be okay with that. And then it'll go where it goes. So
my struggle, would venture to say this is pretty common. I think Brene Brown says comparison is the thief of all joy. When you listen to mainstream podcast or well-known voices, I have a tendency to compare, what I say to them, or the structure or the format or the rhythm. And then you start that doubt. Why is what I have to say of importance or of value? Who's going to want to listen to what I have to say?
Yeah.
And again, I just have to remind myself, look, that's not what this is about. And just to your point, for me, the journey is the destination. And the struggle in the midst of those experiences is actually what's important, not getting to the finish line,
Yeah.
I think you might be able to see it, but over the top of my head, there's a quote that my son had printed on a sign, and Albert Einstein says, no problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it.
Right.
And so, that we're going to keep repeating those things if we don't make an effort to grow and learn. I think there was a movie by Tom Cruise called The Day After Tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
It was about the end of the world.
That's right. Yeah.
But when I saw it, it's not about the end of the world. It's about the mistakes that we make, and we repeat them, and we wake up the next day doing the same thing and stumbling until we figure things out. It was more a metaphor, as I saw it, of life than it was about, aliens taking over the end of the world.
It's so good that you said that, because I was talking to my friend last week. She's an executive director for a safe house in Michigan. And she focuses on domestic violence and human trafficking recovery for victims. Super hard stuff, right? Super hard stuff. We were talking about kind of trauma fatigue and how you continue to serve and lead in those really hard spaces, because they are really hard. 2 of my kiddos, I think I shared with you before, but both my daughters are EMTs now. So my oldest daughter's at EMT and in paramedic school, and my youngest daughter's at EMT and a senior in high school. And so on the weekends she goes out and she, has to try to recover 3-year-old babies who are not breathing, and just really, really hard stuff. And I'm watching them go through this, and then they come home, my kids come home and they try to reconcile this with what's the point, in their faith, and they're struggling with these really huge, hard things. And so she and I were talking about, what is the point? Like, if we were to get super like, what is the point, right, of life and all the things that we ask these questions? And how do you continue to stay in that space? Like you were saying, the destination is not the point. It's the actual journey, right? Being present in these moments. And for me, I've just been in this kind of space of suffering and comfort and this weird like algorithm that they seem to work hand in hand, and at least from the scriptures, like suffering is not absent comfort, right? From a faith perspective or whatever. And I was just thinking that when you were saying that, like, there is a degree that we want pain to go away. Like we don't want to deal with any of it. That's why we procrastinate, right? That's the whole purpose of procrastination, is just to alleviate a real or perceived threat of fear. But that process is the whole kind of point, right? The journey and what you learn and being in those moments, being present. And it's hard. It's really hard to do. So I was just thinking about that, like you were saying.
Yeah. So two things with children, right? The goal is to create that suffering, and for us as well, in an emotionally safe space, right?
Yeah.
So that they can struggle and be protected at the same time and feel, that safety net that they have. But there's one of the reasons when we started the conversation, I said, hey, I'm doing really well to start the new year. And so I've just been on this, mental program, I'll just call it,
Yeah.
started back in November incrementally. And then it was, 1 January was the start, and doing it with a couple friends and accountability partners, so to speak. And, to get linguistic here, the word comfort, the original meaning of comfort was strength from struggle. And today we've interpreted that to mean easy or unimpeded access or success to the things that we desire.
Right.
Which is not comfort. Comfort is knowing that, after a good workout, I feel stronger.
Yeah.
Or having gone through something that I know that I can achieve more. So Stephanie we do homeschool. I should say she does homeschool primarily. I come in and try to regulate every now and then, but it doesn't work.
Read books at night.
Yeah. So they do Bible study, and the Bible studies are good. I'll sit there and just like, wow, I missed this growing up, or maybe I didn't miss it, but the depth of it was not apparent to me at the time.
Sure.
But, in old biblical times, when something of significance happened, they would build altars or stones to memorialize those events. So every time they went by, they would remember what happened in that space. And so how do I take inventory in those moments of struggle and create these, mental, I guess, altars to say, hey, this is something that's significant happened in my life that I overcame, or that I can just reach back and draw upon in those times of struggle.
Yeah. I think it's great that you used comfort. I wasn't thinking comfort when you said that either. I think comfort, I think my cozy chair that I sit in the mornings and I wrap up in my nice fluffy blanket and I drink my coffee, in front of that's what I think comfort. But the struggle, the, strength through the struggling, I think on the other side of that, when you were talking about working out or something that was hard and you overcame it, you get to that piece. I immediately thought of peace and confidence, right? Those were the two words that I would have used to describe that space, that feeling. And I don't think after you were speaking, those are probably the right words that really fit that either.
So what's your response when your kiddos say, what's the point?
Oh,
what does that response look like?
Oh my gosh. It's so hard. We spent a lot of time in the kitchen, right? And when Mark was deployed all those years, it was just me and the kids. And so we'd have a lot of late night jam sessions in our kitchen because, music is kind of a big part of our family. So we still, even the kids are big, we'll sit literally on the kitchen floor, and they'll just sit on the kitchen floor in between the sink and the stove while we're making dinner or whatever. And so we've had a lot of kitchen floor conversations just sitting on the floor, and I just slide down the cabinet and I sit next to my daughter and I'm like, I get it. She's like, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to talk about God. I'm mad at him. And I'm like, well, you can be mad, right? And so I try to show these stories, in the Bible that it doesn't always have to be fluffy and shiny. Like God can handle hard questions. Like that's the point, But I get to the place, just from me working in the pro-life community for 12 years, how I reconcile it is I'm not going to stop babies from dying. Like, that's not the burden that God gave me to carry. Like, I had to reconcile that. I'm not going to create world peace and world hunger and those kinds of things. So the only thing that I can do in that space is to show up every day and to love the person who's standing in front of me to the best of my ability. And so I told her, like, you're out on an ambulance and there's a 3-year-old, like, you're not responsible. You know, you do everything that you can do. And they do, they do everything they can do. And still someone, dies. And sometimes they don't die. Right. And so they've done everything they can do. And I think I just try to encourage her that you show up and you be the best EMT that you can possibly be. Right. You study and you learn and you do the things. But at the end of the day, you can't hold all that and take responsibility for all of those things. I think it's hard. Like, I don't have perfect answers. But I tell her, like, I don't know why you're there. Like, I don't know why you're called to this field or you're in this place today. But there's a person standing in front of you that's suffering. And our job is to try to ease the comfort of other people to the best of our ability. That's kind of where I get to in this space. And I'm learning every day, you know what I mean? Because I don't know how to answer these questions. They're really hard. I've never dealt with them before. So
in this conversation, you said it's hard 4 times.
Thanks for counting.
First time I let it go, second time. And so being cognizant of when I give those things power or weight
sure,
that it doesn't deserve, I'm submitting that I have no control in some sense. But it's like when you find something you love doing, and not even if we love doing it, but are we committed or are we interested? And the difference is, one is the work is hard. The other is I work hard, right? If I'm committed, I work hard. And, I heard somebody say, it's like when you find something you love doing and you enjoy doing, you'll work harder than you've ever worked, but the tools in your hand will feel lighter than anything else. And you'll be able to go for long periods of time without rest.
Yeah.
So one of the mistakes in reflection, and there's probably many, one of the big ones is, as for my oldest child, he was very young and I was young. Stephanie and I were 17. I think we were just 18 when we had Mike. I said, I'm going to do everything I can to prevent the suffering that I had growing up. And in that moment, I didn't realize what I was diminishing or, marginalizing my experiences and not accounting for they had made me what I was and what I'm going to be.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And what I tried to do was I either, tried to prevent them from falling or catch them as they fell instead of letting them fall.
Yeah.
And so when your kid comes home and says, what's the point? I don't think it's hard. I'm like, ooh, now the soil's fertile. As they get older, you have to allow for those moments.
Yeah.
Because that's when we have the ability to pour into them. Jake was, I'll just say it's his first real job in terms of, I don't say corporate, but structure, leadership, reporting, times, those kind of things. And, he's been kind of going through what everyone goes through, his expectations versus, the reality. And when he comes home, I'm just like, ooh, I can create the safety and protection.
Right.
But this is where the growth happens.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's like to be a mother, but, listening to my wife and her love for our children, it's different than mine. Whereas I can understand and appreciate a mother's love.
Right.
And you don't like to see your kids suffering.
Yeah.
And in the moment, I'm like, yes, this is great,
Yeah.
Because there's going to come a point where, they're going to have to step out and they're going to face some other things. But the fact that a 17-year-old or a young adult are having the ability to experience these emotional events at such a young age is just a phenomenal opportunity. And so I don't think hard when you say it. I think opportunity.
Yeah.
Not only for them to grow, but an opportunity for your relationship to grow with them.
Yeah.
And solidify, the importance of the generations that came before us and the value that they have and not discounting it to the degree that I think a lot of people do today.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Mark and I, we got to, my hubby, right? Which, we got to that place because we both grew up in really, I say difficult spaces, poverty and abuse and different things. And we work really hard. We have a degree of, all of these different values, things that we value as a result of that upbringing, which I very much, after I went through my healing journey and I really got to reconcile a lot of that, go through forgiveness, go through all the things I needed to go through. I do very much appreciate, and I won't say count it joy, because that's another thing we talk about, but I do very much value that, right? Like there's so much in that. And like you said, when my dad passed away in 2019, I went home for the funeral because my dad passed away at 65, but my grandma was still alive and all of these great aunts and uncles are in their 90s and they're all sitting around the table. And there's so much history and there's so much resiliency and there was so much determination, right? I mean, they're like farmers. And my great grandmother brought the 6 kids from Texas to Oklahoma because my great grandfather was, alcoholic and kind of abusive. And she would sleep in the field at night because he would come home, from wherever and on a rampage. And so she'd take the kids outside and she'd sleep in the field. And her brother was in Oklahoma and he said, "Hey, I have a homestead. You can come. Bring the kids and come." So imagine like early 30s, she's going to take these 6 kids on a car up to Oklahoma. And she gets there and he's living nothing. There's no house. He's living on the river in a tent. And she's got 6 kids and she has nothing. And she has to create a home. She has to find a job in town. She has to take care of these babies. So for, a better part of a year, my grandmother at, 6, 7 years old, however she was, lived on the creek in a tent, washing her clothes on a rock. And so to your point, that's what I come from. Like those are the people, right, who raised me. And if we get into the whole DNA and all the things, but that is who I, am. My other grandparents were farmers and my grandma and grandpa, my mom's side, raised 10 kids. And my grandfather was a farmer every single day. They struggled with all of these things. And they made the best choices they could with what they had at the time. I mean, they made amazing choices, right? At the funeral, I was looking out across this group of people and just seeing them for like who they are and what they're made of and all the things that they've contributed. And so I kind of came back from it with a different perspective for our own kids. And so when they struggled, that's when Mark and I started, like very much like you said, we started to see that when we tried to insulate them from the pain and we didn't want them to have to go through the things that we went through. And there are certain things that you shouldn't have to do, like abuse is not okay. So there are certain degrees of, but there was a whole bunch of other resiliency kind of muscles that they needed to kind of develop. And I feel like the other thing I try to do with them when Mark retired from the military and from special ops, I felt like I needed to acknowledge their sacrifice as being, special ops kids and kind of the things that they went through, And so they do over the years, we've worked really hard to kind of let them struggle in the things that we could probably sweep in and fix it, but we need you to develop these muscles, right? Because those are going to be here long after we're gone. So I think that's maybe, like you said, as you get through the different seasons of parenting, you look back and say, no, it's okay. I don't have to fix everything for you. Like I need you to struggle because you need the muscle. You need that resiliency muscle. And for me, I think it's the faith, right? They need the faith. And the faith is, it's like I said, it never ends. It's hard. It's not hard. I'll have to remember not to say that anymore.
It takes commitment.
It takes commitment. Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's not hard work.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's like anything is hard. But think of when you talk about the generations, because I had a friend at the organization in the command that whenever they would go visit family, the assignment for his kids were, you need to learn one thing about your elders that you didn't know before you knew them.
Oh, wow.
Because they had a life, to your point,
yeah.
Moving to Oklahoma, that's a story that books are made of.
Yeah.
And so my mother-in-law, her mother, I think she had broken her hip or something. And, they moved her to what they call a rehabilitation. But what I grew up knowing them as nursing homes.
Right.
Because once you get into them, it's, sometimes it's difficult to get out of them.
Yeah.
And when I was in the organization, I had a couple trips down here to Tampa. And so I just made it a point to just go in there and sit in a room and just sit. I think, Matlock's always on or Law and Order, and I would just sit there and watch TV or
Gunsmoke.
Whatever it was. And it just so happened that, my mother-in-law was there with me and we were just sitting and she had said she remembers, and I'm down here in Tampa, but she remembers Drew Park where the football stadium is.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she used to live there. And it used to be a POW camp during World War II
Wow.
for Nazis.
Wow.
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And I grew up here. And then she said, yes, there was a few times where they had prisoners escape.
Mm.
And she remembers one of them walking into their home and her mom pulling out the shotgun and holding them at gunpoint till the military police
Wow.
arrived. And then she went on to say, there was a bomber that had crashed, in the field next to their homes, and her dad was out there pulling out the survivors and had, third-degree burns on his arms. And I looked at my mother-in-law. I'm like, have you ever heard this story? And she said, no, I've never heard it.
Wow.
And I went back and looked up for the history on that experience, and it happened. And just that I missed it in all those years having spent with them and the opportunities to have these conversations. So when I think about, your daughter asking, what's the point?
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to impact generations to come, in that family tree. And so can it be difficult if you don't have the right word? Sure.
Yeah.
But there are opportunities that I think will pay dividends that we may not ever see in our lifetime.
No, that's very true. And I think sometimes we have this need to fix it, like you said, and that's not the point either. I think just being present, one, in the moment, that goes back to anything, right? Like suffering as a whole. But then there's also just the power of being present in the moment. I think maybe I shared with you, I'm not sure, but like we have good friends, they're going through cancer. I have another family member is going through stage 4 cancer, just my dad passing away. Like there's just all these moments in my life where people are struggling and we get to this place where we're like, got to fix it, need to stop it, need to do this, need to do that, right? It's like this need to control it or need to whatever, like you said. And sometimes that's not the point. And you miss out on those moments, like you said. You miss out on the moments of being present with the person, sitting beside their hospital bed, sitting on the floor with them in the kitchen, and just listening to them and seeing them. We just miss it because we're trying to fix it, right, and avoid it. My sister-in-law has a little thing. I have a Post-it that I put on my wall by my desk, and it says, choose your hard. And that's what she says. She's like, being married is hard. Being divorced is hard. She's like, being a parent is hard. Not being a parent is hard, and she lists all of these things and she's like, so choose your hard, choose it, like you said, and then commit to doing it with excellence as much as you can. So I think that's really good. Yeah.
That's good. Dear friend, he's retiring this year, but he got certified through hospice to be an end-of-life specialist.
Sure.
I think that's what they call it.
Palliative care. Yeah.
And this is not someone you would think, he came from our organization community.
Yeah.
But he had said, he learned to appreciate and find joy in those moments of transition.
Sure.
Working in that space. And I was just like, wow, that's not something I would sign up for just out of the blue. And he tells a story, man. He had got there and I guess the nurses had told him, hey, don't expect much. He hasn't talked, for quite some time. And they'd gone through the procedures. And he's calling out his name. And I think he was in the Marine Corps. He might have been a private or a corporal. And he calls out attention.
Oh.
And the guy responds, yes, sir.
Oh my gosh.
And he says he lost it in the moment.
Yeah.
But those experiences that he was allowed, or opportunity that he was allowed to share with those people as they were transitioning, he says they gave him more than he ever gave.
Yeah.
And so back to what's the point,
Yeah.
I feel today like I don't know anything. When I was younger, I was sure of a lot of things. Today, I'm not sure of much, but the things that I am sure of, I'm very sure of. And one of those is I don't know much.
Yeah. Mark and I say that a lot. We've said that a lot this last year. Like the older I get, the less I know. I don't know. And I think I was just having a conversation with a different gentleman on Monday because we were recording a conversation about for the sanctity of life. And he was sharing that he was speaking with different, people, different organizations and churches. And, they were like, well, we do it the right way. We pray the right way. We do salvation the right way. We do these things the right way. And so we got on this kind of topic of arrogance, which as you're talking and you're sharing these stories, I think that's just empathy, like humility and empathy, right? Like those things are so important. And I feel like with my daughter, like if we talk all these scenarios, all these things we talked about today, it's that like entering into someone else's space and having the humility to realize that this is an honor like that you're here with this person in this time and space, right? And honor that person, honor their name, honor their time, honor their story. And then just to have empathy for that person that you might not understand, you've not done it. But I feel like we're missing that on lots of degrees in leadership and life, whatever. And I think that's just like, you don't know. I mean, we do know a lot of things, like you said, for the things that you know, be confident and commit to those things, but just realize that you don't know. And I try to live in that space the older I get every day. I don't know. I don't know what it's like for the CEO that's going through this. I don't know what it's like for this pastor who's trying to do this thing. I don't know what it's like for this mom who's homeless, who's pregnant, who doesn't know if she's going to be able to like find a place to sleep tonight, much less deliver a healthy baby. You know what I mean? Like there's so many things people are going through that we don't understand, and you can help them. And there's a reason for you to, like lean in, but you got to lean in, I think, from that place of humility and empathy, and just know that you're not maybe going to fix it all the time. And sometimes that's not the point.
I'm going to mark something you said, and I think I'm going to try to come back to it. Mark Twain says, education consists mainly of what we have unlearned. And the first time I heard it, I was like, what? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And then you're like, whoa, that's really significant. And I think that's what you're talking about, is unlearning some of those things that you were, those things that you stood on the hill and you died for.
Yeah.
And I'm right. And then 10 years later, you're like, man, I was an idiot.
Yeah.
Like I had no clue what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And I can think a lot of moments like that in my life.
Yeah, that's very true. So where are you today, now that you've interviewed me for 40 minutes? In your life and your journey, when we started this conversation, you said, I'm really, really good.
Yeah. And I want to share that. But I want to ask you, since you're a little bit newer on this journey.
Okay.
Because I don't want to preempt any of your answers.
No, it's good.
When did you officially start kind of your own business, or what was the date on that?
My business started in August of 2021. August of 2021. Okay.
Right. Kind of at the height of the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Or towards the second wave.
Mm-hmm. I lost my job in May of 2021. Unexpectedly, I was laid off with no notice. And I'd had surgery. I'd had an ankle fusion surgery, so I couldn't walk for 3 weeks. Like I was crawling around my house, which is super fun. So it was like I had surgery on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Like by day 5, I got laid off, no notice. And so I video blogged it, which again, I'm opposed to video because it makes me seem, anyway. But I just was in that season. So I couldn't go anywhere. I was stuck in the bed in my chair. I had to feel it. I couldn't work my way out of it, clean the house. I couldn't avoid it. I had to just sit in it, which was really good. It made me deal with all my feelings and insecurities and all the I'm a failure and all the things. And then out of that season, right after, within a week, my daughter got in a car accident with her fiance and ended up partly amputating part of her hand. There was just a bunch of stuff. So it was like bam, bam. So I just call it the washing machine summer. Like that's all I can equate it to. Like that's the analogy of just being in a washing machine and just da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I felt like that's how we were for months. And so I knew I didn't want to go back to the government. I knew at that point in my life, there wasn't a company that I really wanted to work for, to be candid. I felt like that I needed to do something else. So I thought, now's the time. I can go do these other things, or I can try to lean into what this crazy, foggy, unknown thing might be. And it's still crazy foggy. I'm still adjusting all the time. Like, wait, did this make sense? But I just had a conversation with a person last week. Like, I love it. I love this season of my life. But that's kind of how I, made that. I had been thinking about it for a while, and then the job layoff was kind of the catalyst for that.
So in, let's just say, a year and a half, short of a year and a half, what are some of the top things that you've learned?
I learned that I'm more capable than, I think that I am. It goes back to the fear and the insecurity and the biases and all that stuff. So I've learned that, and going along with being capable, is it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a 10-point plan. And I'm going to learn more in the process than I'm ever going to learn with the plan. So just lean in, do the thing, and then try to stay as agile. I use that word agile, as possible. Like I'm always in this constant state of reflection and feedback and trying to do that, and not from a place of being hypercritical, because I feel like sometimes that you get hypercritical, right? When we start to like in this feedback loop, but really doing it from a place of like, okay, did this work? Did that not work? And staying in that place of fluidity and being okay with that, which is really the biggest lesson that I've learned. Like, it's okay. It doesn't have to be in a nice little box. It's okay. It doesn't have to be a 10-point business plan. Just leaning in and trying to help the people who are standing in front of me today and be okay with that.
And to be fair to you, I do want to point out for those that, don't know you, you worked in finance.
Yeah. Yeah. And acquisitions.
Acquisition.
Yeah.
Which that's a structure field.
Yeah.
Okay. And those are balance sheets and those are finite parameters. And so to say what you said, for some that may be more creative and color outside the lines, or maybe that is not your natural, but it is what you were conditioned and trained to do for a significant period of time in your profession. So to have that agility, I do want to point out that you say it, with context, that you say it with such ease, but I know that's more of a struggle for you than probably most because of your background.
That's fair. And I think, in the military, everything is order, right? Every like t-shirts this size, socks like this, da, 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 da. And I was very successful in the military. Like, I was very successful. For the first time in my life, when I went into the military, that was the place that was controlled, because my life was not controlled. My upbringing wasn't controlled. There was no control. There was no order. And so coming into the military space, everything was left and right, and I knew exactly what to do, and I knew how to be successful. And I kind of, I won't say dominate, but I was really good at doing those things. And so I got to that place, like you said, I knew where all the boundaries were, and I knew how to work through that. And it brought me a great sense of comfort and confidence. And then moving into this season, it was a struggle. So that's where I am today. I think those are the lessons if I look back over the last year and a half, which, had I not started the company and went into consulting, I don't know that I would have had enough confidence to lean into the podcast, if I'm being honest, So, and this year I just signed a contract with a book coach to write a book, which is something I've always wanted to do. But again, like, who's going to listen to me? Like, what value do I have to offer the world? So that's like this next piece of just, like you said, continuing to just be present in the moments and be true to yourself and honor that and commit to it. So,
to be honest,
it's hard. To be honest, it's hard.
full disclosure, or, if I'm being transparent.
Hey friends, well, that was it for segment 1. Join us in 2 weeks when I share the rest of the conversation with Mike, and we'll continue to discuss all those hard things about life, leadership, our experiences in the military, parenting, and faith, all wrapped up into one big ball because, well, that's just basically how life works. But you'll get to hear more about the man behind the mentor as Mike shares his struggles and challenges and talks about how he navigated disappointment and loss in his past and even most recently in his business. And I hope our stories bring you some encouragement as you continue to discover new ways to go to the world and lead yourself and others well. Because life is hard sometimes, friend. I get it. But as we often say on the show, you have a responsibility to lead yourself and others well. And leadership starts with you. And you matter. Okay? Remember that it doesn't always have to be perfect to have an impact. I hope that you have an amazing day, friend. I'll see you later. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. This podcast was brought to you by our amazing producers at Wildfire Creative Company. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please hop over to iTunes or Spotify, subscribe, rate it, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. And make sure you come back. We'll talk more about the essence and elements of leadership on the first and third Thursday of every month. If you enjoyed today's show, you can head over to danitacummins.com/podcast and gain access to additional free resources. But make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so you can stay up to date on the latest shows. Have an amazing day. Talk to you soon.